On a scorching afternoon, the city street was alive with the usual hum of daily life, until a single moment shattered the fragile calm. Tan, a white police officer hardened by years in a system steeped in prejudice, stepped out from the shadowed alley with eyes burning cold. His gaze locked on Lynn, a black woman whose quiet confidence belied the storm gathering beneath the surface, without warning, fueled by deep-seated bias and an unchecked sense of authority. Tan delivered a brutal kick that sent Lynn sprawling to the cracked pavement. The sound echoed, not just a harsh thud, but a symbol of a long history of violence and silence. But this time, the story was different. Because Lynn was no ordinary woman. Beneath her unassuming clothes and calm demeanor, she carried a secret few could fathom. She was an undercover FBI agent. Her mission was perilous, to expose abuses of power hidden within the very system sworn to protect. And now that violent act, the kick so vicious and raw, would become the final, undeniable proof. What was meant to silence her only ignited a spark. That single moment captured the attention of onlookers, cameras, and investigators alike. It peeled back layers of deception, revealing the ugly truth lurking beneath badges and protocols. Tan's impulsive cruelty, born from fear and prejudice, set in motion a chain of events no one could stop. This incident would not fade quietly into the shadows. It would unravel a web of lies, challenge the complacency of a broken system, and force the world to confront the price of unchecked power. The question now isn't just who did what, but what happens when justice refuses to stay down. And how far will one woman go to make sure the truth is heard? Welcome to a story where courage meets conflict, where silence breaks, and where one act of violence changes everything. The street, once humming with the ordinary cadence of life, now seems suspended in a heavy silence, broken only by Tan's sharp, biting words. "You filthy, undocumented brat," he spat, voice cutting through the air like a jagged blade. His eyes, dark with contempt, locked onto Lynn, as if daring her to react. Around them, pedestrians froze mid-step. An elderly man clutching his shopping cart, a young mother shielding her child, a teenager clutching his phone, all caught in the tension of a moment that felt too raw, too volatile to ignore. Tan's tone shifted, no longer just hateful, but commanding. "Turn that off!" He barked at a young woman holding up her phone, live streaming the entire scene. "This is official police procedure. You don't get to film this." His words, sharp and unyielding, were meant to silence, to intimidate. But the crowd was restless now, their eyes burning with a mixture of shock and growing outrage. Lynn stood unmoved. No flare of anger, no cry of protest escaped her lips. Instead, her hands gripped tightly around a crumpled paper bag, the kind that seemed fragile but, in her grasp, carried weight far heavier than its appearance suggested. This bag wasn't just a bundle of papers. It was a shield, a silent testament to the truth she carried. She held it close as if it were the last vestige of safety in a world suddenly so hostile. Tan stepped closer, his shadow looming large over her, voice dripping with scorn. "You think you're above the law?" he sneered. "You walk like you're trying to prove you're innocent, but I've seen your kind before." His words were a poison, meant to belittle, to strip away dignity. Yet Lynn's eyes remained steady, unmoving, betraying none of the fear or hurt that surely bubbled beneath the surface. Around them, something was shifting. The crowd, once silent, began to murmur, whispers of disapproval and disbelief swelling into an undercurrent of collective defiance. Phones were raised higher, fingers tapping furiously as people captured every moment. The insults, the threats, the undeniable tension that crackled like electricity between Lynn and Tan. A young woman's live stream continued, the glow of the screen illuminating her pale, determined face as she narrated quietly. This isn't just a scuffle. This is abuse of power. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of what was unfolding. The community wasn't just witnessing. They were becoming participants, unwilling to let this story slip away unseen. Tan's gaze flicked nervously toward the growing crowd, searching for allies, reassurance. But instead of nods of approval, he found faces etched with disgust, eyes hardening in condemnation. His smirk faltered, the mask of control slipping ever so slightly. The power he thought he wielded felt suddenly fragile, challenged by the sheer weight of collective witness. The atmosphere thickened as tension mounted. The heat of the midday sun was nothing compared to the pressure building in that moment. Like the calm before a storm ready to break. People edged closer, their phones recording, voices ready to rise if the moment demanded. For the first time in a long while, silence was not an option. Lynn, blood dripping faintly from a grazed lip, did not flinch. She stood tall, arms wrapped protectively around the paper bag, embodying resilience in the face of cruelty. Her calm defiance was a stark contrast to the chaos around her, a quiet but powerful rebellion against injustice. Tan, sensing the tide turning against him, tried to assert control, his voice rougher now, dripping with frustration. "You people put it on paper and still can't do a damn thing." He spat at the crowd, attempting to rally support, to shake off the growing disdain. But his words fell flat, swallowed by a sea of disapproval. The faces around him no longer showed shock or confusion, only repulsion. Mothers pulled their children closer. Elders shook their heads in silent reproach. Strangers locked eyes with Lynn, as if to offer unspoken solidarity. The community's outrage was no longer just a reaction. It was a declaration, and in that charged moment, the fragile veneer of authority that Tan clung to began to crack. The street, once a stage for his unchecked power, was now a battlefield where truth and courage challenged hate and violence. Every recorded frame, every shared clip, became a small act of rebellion, a collective refusal to let this act of cruelty go unanswered. The story was no longer just about one violent kick. It was about standing up when others fall, about breaking silence in the face of fear, and about a community beginning to reclaim its voice. The world was watching, and for the first time, justice wasn't just a distant hope. It was a demand rising from the very streets where it had been denied. As the sun continued to beat down, shadows lengthened, and the echoes of confrontation lingered. One thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The grainy footage of that scorching day flickered on screens scattered across a dimly lit room, where Hang sat hunched over multiple monitors. The hum of computers filled the silence, punctuated only by the occasional beep signaling processed data. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, traced every frame, every motion of Lynn's rapid rise after the brutal kick. This was no ordinary stumble or reflex. The precision, the controlled pivot, the poised stance, all pointed to one chilling conclusion. Lynn was trained, an operative, a government agent hidden in plain sight. The AI systems worked tirelessly, algorithms sifting through movements and patterns, tagging anomalies, raising flags. When Lynn's reactions appeared faster than any civilians, faster than even most police officers, the system beeped insistently, sending an alert to the watch list. It was a database reserved for individuals marked by exceptional skill, especially those involved in sensitive or dangerous incidents. Lynn's name was nowhere in the records, yet the markers were unmistakable. Hang's fingers paused above the keyboard. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments that didn't fit the narrative fed to the public. Tan's violence wasn't random, nor was Lynn's apparent silence. There was a deeper game, one hidden beneath layers of official reports and political spin. But as the investigation unfolded, so did the barriers. The higher-ups, the state-level authorities, pressured the case to be closed abruptly. Official statements cited potential impacts on local government relations, a vague phrase that cloaked the truth in bureaucratic shadows. The violence was brushed aside, labeled as routine procedure, something to be forgotten. Buried under red tape and silence, Hang's heart tightened. She knew better. This was not just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a rotten system, one afraid to confront its own darkness. The weight of politics crushed the fragile threads of justice she was trying to weave. But she refused to surrender to the edge of the report. She had scrawled a note in her own hand. "When his violence lands on the right person, I will reopen it." Those words were not just a promise. They were a vow born from years of watching injustice slip through the cracks. Hang was no stranger to fighting uphill battles, but this was different. This was personal. Every night, she revisited the footage, enhanced it with AI-assisted technology, sharpening grainy images until faces and details emerged with unsettling clarity. She watched the moment when the former director of the State Civil Rights Fund handed an envelope, one that vanished into the murky depths of the official files, dismissed and forgotten. That man's subsequent suicide only deepened the mystery, a dark whisper of consequences no one dared speak aloud. Audio clips buried beneath layers of data surfaced unexpectedly, capturing Tan's voice. Cold, predatory, dripping with venom. "You look just like the last one," he sneered, his tone like a butcher selecting prey. The words sent chills down Hang's spine. There was history here, a pattern of abuse cloaked in silence, protected by fear and power. In her quiet office, illuminated only by the blue glow of her monitors, Hang clenched her jaw. She wasn't just chasing a case. She was chasing truth against a system determined to bury it. Her resolve hardened. She would not let Lynn's fight be forgotten, nor would she let Tan's violence go unchallenged. Yet, the pressure mounted. Colleagues warned her to tread carefully. Doors closed where they once opened. Whispers circulated, questioning her motives, painting her as a troublemaker. The tension was suffocating, a tangled web of contradictions. Justice versus politics, truth versus power, courage versus fear. But Hang's eyes never wavered from the screen. In those frozen frames, she saw more than evidence. She saw a spark of defiance, a call to action, and she was ready to answer it, no matter the cost. Because sometimes, the hardest battles are fought not in the courtroom, but in the shadows where silence tries to reign. And Hang was prepared to bring that silence into the light. The silence in the courtroom was palpable, broken only by the faint rustling of papers and the low murmur of whispered conversations. Hang stood resolute at the front, her eyes scanning the room filled with skeptical faces, some hardened by years of politics and others hungry for truth. She held in her hands the fruits of her relentless pursuit. Newly uncovered audio recordings, grainy but unmistakable videos, and irrefutable proof that pierced the carefully constructed veil of denial surrounding Tan's actions. The audio crackled to life, filling the room with Tan's voice, harsh, venomous, dripping with racial slurs and threats. "You think you're better than us?" he sneered. "I've dealt with your kind before, and I always win." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap, each syllable exposing the deep-seated hatred that had fueled his abuse of power. The videos played alongside, capturing moments of aggression, intimidation, and blatant disregard for the dignity of those he was sworn to protect. Gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, revealing a pattern not of isolated misconduct, but systemic violence and racism that had festered unchecked. The courtroom, once a place of quiet doubt, was now charged with a heavy tension, an undercurrent of reckoning. Then, the moment that left everyone breathless. Lynn stepped forward, her calm demeanor replaced by a fierce clarity. With a deliberate motion, she pulled from her jacket an official FBI badge, its cold metal gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights. The seal embossed upon it seemed to radiate an unyielding authority that silenced the room instantly. All eyes locked onto her. The shock was visible. Jawlines slackened, eyes widened, and a stunned hush fell. The woman who had been so composed, so silent under Tan's assault, was revealed to be no mere victim, but a federal agent risking everything to expose corruption and abuse. Her identity shattered assumptions, dismantling the narrative Tan and his supporters had spun so desperately. Tan's face paled, his confident mask cracking. "This is a setup," he spat, desperation seeping into his voice. "They're trying to frame me. This is all a trap." But his protests rang hollow against the mounting evidence and the unwavering testimony of Lin and Hang. The courtroom was no longer a battleground for words, but a stage where truth wielded its unbreakable sword as the judge's gavel struck. Signaling a turning point, Tan realized the magnitude of his fall. The walls of denial closed in, and the weight of accountability was inescapable. The facade of power and control crumbled beneath the relentless light of justice, exposing a man whose actions had finally caught up with him. The crowd, once divided, began to shift. Faces softened with empathy. Nods of understanding passed silently between strangers, and the whispered hope for change grew louder. In that room, justice was no longer a distant ideal but a tangible force, stirred by courage and the unyielding will to confront darkness. Hang watched quietly, a sense of vindication mingling with the burden of what was yet to come. The fight was far from over, but the truth had broken free, and with it, the promise of a new beginning. The courtroom's revelation was just the spark. Beyond its walls, a firestorm was igniting. The community, once silent or fearful, now found its voice roaring with unprecedented force. Social organizations, activists, and ordinary citizens united, their outrage crystallizing into action. They gathered signatures, compiled testimonies, and prepared class action lawsuits that sent shockwaves through the local power structures. Messages flooded social media, stories of similar abuses surfaced, and the momentum was undeniable. The demand was clear: accountability. Tan was no longer just an individual on trial. He had become the symbol of a broken system, a target for collective reckoning. Each new allegation added weight to the mounting case against him, amplifying the call for justice. But as the spotlight intensified, Tan's world began to unravel. The public gaze pierced the veneer of control he once wielded with ease. Old friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the growing storm. His family, caught between loyalty and disbelief, withdrew, leaving him increasingly isolated. The once confident man was now haunted by whispers, side glances, and the relentless echo of condemnation. Mental strain crept in quietly, insidious and relentless. Sleepless nights turned to restless days, and the weight of his actions pressed heavily on his shoulders. Every news report, every social media post, felt like another judgment, another nail in a coffin of his own making. The facade cracked further, revealing a man struggling to maintain composure amid a crumbling world. Meanwhile, Hang worked tirelessly behind the scenes. With meticulous attention, she prepared legal strategies that wove together evidence, testimonies, and the undeniable truth unearthed by the community's courage. Every document was scrutinized, every loophole closed, as she built a case not just for punishment but for systemic change. The tension between public pressure and legal process created a charged atmosphere, nerves frayed on all sides. Supporters of justice feared the system's inertia, worried powerful interests might still shield Tan. Skeptics whispered doubts, attempting to sow confusion. Yet, beneath the noise, Hang's determination remained unshaken. The stakes were immense, not just for Tan, but for a community yearning for redemption. The battle was no longer confined to courtrooms or media headlines. It was a struggle for truth, dignity, and the very soul of a society confronting its own shadows as the case advanced. Every step forward was met with resistance, every victory shadowed by uncertainty. The story unfolding was more than one man's downfall. It was a testament to the power of unity, the cost of silence, and the fragile hope that justice, though delayed, could still prevail. And in the quiet moments between hearings, when the world's eyes were elsewhere, Tan faced the deepest reckoning. Not from others, but from within himself. The isolation was not just physical but existential. He wrestled with guilt, fear, and the terrifying possibility of a future stripped bare of all he once believed unshakable. The community watched, anxious and hopeful, as the scales of justice tipped slowly but unmistakably. The question lingered. Could the system truly transform? Could one downfall spark the change so desperately needed? The answer hung in the balance, as fragile and urgent as the breath held by all who dared to believe. The morning air was heavy with a tense stillness as two unmarked federal vehicles pulled up quietly in front of Tan's residence. The neighborhood, unaccustomed to such solemn displays, seemed to hold its breath. The sound of firm boots descending the steps reverberated like a solemn drumbeat, signaling that the long-awaited moment had arrived. Tan's door swung open, and 5 agents stepped inside. Steady, resolute, carrying the weight of a justice long denied as the handcuffs clicked closed around Tan's wrists. A flurry of cameras and flashing lights captured every flicker of emotion on his face. Desperation, disbelief, the slow crumbling of a man who once believed himself untouchable. No grand resistance, no dramatic outburst. Just the quiet surrender of a man facing the consequences of his own choices. The images flooded news channels, streamed live, and were shared across social media, embedding themselves into the collective consciousness. Viewers watched, some with vindication, others with sorrow, as the man who had wielded power with cruelty now found himself stripped of it. His violent acts, once whispered about and dismissed, were now broadcast openly, no longer hidden behind badges or bureaucracy. The weight of accountability pressed down, not just on Tan, but on the entire system that had enabled him in a rare moment of candor. During an emotionally charged hearing, Tan's voice broke the silence. "I kicked her because that's what I was taught," he confessed, each word heavy with regret and resignation. "Strike first, ask later. If you don't, you're the one on the ground." The courtroom absorbed his admission like a bitter truth, the echoes of a policing culture outdated and broken. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Tan, but for an entire institution grappling with its dark past. Across the city, Hang watched from her modest office, a quiet mix of exhaustion and hope washing over her. She wasn't the one standing in the spotlight, but she was the steadfast force behind it, a beacon for justice amid shadows of fear and denial. Her tireless work had pierced through layers of silence, exposing a truth that many wished to remain hidden. She understood that justice was not merely a verdict handed down in a courtroom, but a journey, a painful, messy, and deeply human process. It was about healing wounds inflicted not just on one woman, but on a community scarred by betrayal and broken trust. Tears welled quietly in her eyes as she thought of Lynn, the brave woman who had stood, unbowed, against violence and hatred. Lynn's courage had ignited a movement, and now, through Hang's efforts, the system was beginning to change. Transparency was no longer a distant ideal, but a tangible force reshaping policies and attitudes. The walls of that office seemed to hum with newfound energy, each file, each report, a testament to battles fought and won. There was still so much work to do, but the momentum was undeniable. Hang felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but it was a burden she bore willingly. Outside, the community gathered, not for celebration, but for reflection. They shared stories, tears mingling with laughter, memories of pain tempered by hope. They knew the path ahead was long, and the scars would not vanish overnight. Yet, in that moment, they recognized the power of collective courage and the promise of justice finally served. The world had seen the fall of a man once thought invincible, but more importantly, it had witnessed the rise of a truth that could no longer be silenced. And as the sun set over a city waking to change, Hang stood quietly, knowing this was only the beginning. Not just of reform, but of healing, forgiveness, and a future where justice would no longer be deferred. In the depths of her heart, she whispered a vow, to fight not for glory, but for every silent voice yearning to be heard, for every hand reaching out in hope, for every soul seeking the light of justice. And in that vow, there was power, unyielding, eternal, and deeply human. The fall of Tan wasn't just the end of a man's reign of cruelty. It marked the beginning of a profound transformation, rippling through communities, media, and the very technology that shapes our modern world. Almost overnight, platforms that once unwittingly amplified voices of hate now took a stand, refusing to host content glorifying him. His images, once displayed with pride in security magazines and police commendations, were systematically removed. Algorithms flagged his likeness as harmful, barring attempts to recreate or share it. In this digital cleansing, the collective conscience of a society in change revealed itself, no longer tolerating symbols of violence and discrimination. Hang, meanwhile, found herself thrust into the spotlight, not by choice, but by necessity. Though media outlets sought her interviews and accolades, she remained humble, driven not by fame, but by a deep commitment to justice. "I don't fight for recognition," she often said quietly. "I fight because someone has to stand when others cannot." Her calm determination inspired those around her, reminding us all that true leadership is measured not by applause, but by unwavering moral courage. Within the internal records of law enforcement agencies, Tan's name lingered, but not as a badge of honor. It was marked with red notations, signaling removal and repudiation. This quiet act was more than administrative. It was symbolic, a clear declaration that the era of unchecked violence and prejudice was over. It signaled hope for a future where accountability reigns and where the badge is a symbol of service, not oppression. From this story, we learn vital lessons. A good cop is not defined by how forcefully they assert control, but by their dedication to protect justice and uphold human rights without resorting to violence. It's a call to all who wear the uniform and to the communities they serve. Respect and dignity are the foundations of true law enforcement. For you, watching and reading this story, remember that change begins with awareness and courage. Every voice raised against injustice adds strength to the chorus demanding fairness. Whether you are a citizen, a professional, or a student, your commitment to justice shapes the world we share. If this story moved you, if it sparked hope or reflection, please subscribe to our channel. Here, we dive deep into stories of courage, uncover truths, and explore the lessons that guide us toward a better society. Your subscription helps us continue this vital work and brings you more inspiring content that empowers and educates. Together, we can ensure that the legacy left behind is one of integrity, compassion, and relentless pursuit of justice for every Lin, every Hang, and every community yearning for change. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay with us, stay informed, and most importantly, stay courageous.